Learning how to effectively add contrast in your photos is an important skill to have if you want to bring out its potential, and it could even make it look like it was taken by a pro. So today I'll walk you through how I do that in Lightroom Classic, and mind you, we're looking at things beyond just an S-curve. So as a background, I took this image in Malaysia last week because I wanted to remaster my photo of it from 2018. So the scene on its own is already very contrasty as I was photographing straight into the sunrise, and the mosque is going to be backlit. As a first step, I took bracketed photos and merging them in Lightroom will give me more information in the shadows to work with. The first quick and easy way to add contrast in your photo is of course if you use a contrast slider. And as you can see, if I crank it upwards, the histogram just gets wider and wider. But there is going to be little to no control over how this gets applied, so I rarely actually use this slider, but I just had to show it to you. What I really usually do first is that I will make use of the tonal sliders as part of the basic adjustments. And for this image, my main priority is of course going to be the beautiful pink mosque of Putrajaya. And currently it is looking a little bit dark. So I will increase the exposure so that we see it a little bit more. And of course you can see that this is going to blow out our sky, which is fine because we can fix that by decreasing the highlights a bit and bringing back some of the details. And the image right now is looking a little bit flat, so I wanted to widen the dynamic range quite a bit, and I will do that by increasing the whites and decreasing the blacks. As a bonus tip, you can press the Alt key so you can see where you are clipping your details already. For this image, I don't really care if I am going to be clipping my whites already because that is actually going to be the sun. I will just try to avoid clipping my blacks. And if you toggle the eye, then you can see how far we've come along, and it's looking a lot better than when we started. The most popular editing tip out there is probably to create an S-curve, and you can do that by heading over to the tone curve section and placing 3 dots on the tone curve, which represents your shadows, midtones, and highlights. And if you pull down the shadows to make the darks darker and pull up the highlights to make the highlights brighter. And as you can see, as I do that, the histogram is just spreading wider and wider. So the tone curve is really just a great way to add contrast in an image while having some form of degree of the intensity of how much effect you're going to be applying at different tonal values. And as a bonus tip for a more precise selection, you can use this pointer and hover it over the tones that you want to adjust, and you will just see where that point is going to lie on the tone curve. How far you want to pull the curve, completely up to your preference, but for me, I think I'll just leave it somewhere over here. For some photos at this point, it's probably going to be looking good enough already, but we want to make our photos look pro, right? So this is where we target our adjustments locally through the use of masks. By applying specific adjustments to targeted areas, we can really shape the image by naturally enhancing contrast and highlighting specific areas that we want to put more focus on. And Lightroom has some very powerful masking tools, so let's look at how to use some of them. Looking at the image, the first thing that I want to edit is of course the sky, because currently it is looking a little bit too bright. So if we go over to the mask, I will create a linear gradient and select the top part of the image and then lower down the exposure. And as you can see, it's going to be affecting the top part of the mosque. And at this point, you might just be wondering why I don't just use the select sky option of Lightroom, which does a pretty decent job of just selecting the sky while avoiding the mosque. Well, the answer for that is because if I use the selection and then lower down the exposure, it might look a little bit unnatural, and then you can also see some haloing on the mosque. So my preference is to just use a linear gradient and then adjust the mosque separately later on, which is kind of doing the same thing but in a different way. To adjust the mosque, I'm going to be using the Select Objects mask with the rectangle select option, which allows me to draw an area, and then from that area Lightroom is going to detect objects. I think that's going to be a fairly decent selection, which I can add the bottom part with a brush, something like this, and then I can increase the exposure quite a bit like that, maybe even the shadows. And the next thing that I want to do is that I want to add shape to the mosque, and how I'm going to be doing that is that I follow the light. So as you can see, left part of the image, there's going to be the sunrise, and then it's going to hit the left side of the mosque. So I want to enhance that visual. To do that, I will select the mosque once more, and then I will intersect the mask with a linear gradient to only target the left part of the mosque. And because we know the light hits the left side, so it's going to look a little bit more bright, and increase the exposure and shadows just a little bit. And I will also add warmth because it's sunrise, the light hits there, so it should be a little bit warmer. And to further enhance the shadows, I will also use a luminance range and select the shadowed part of the mosque. So what the luminance range mask does is that based on your selected luminance value, it will create a range. So that is going to be depicted in this box. You can adjust how wide you want that range should be, and I want to just target the darkest parts of the frame. And these two sliders are just your fall off points, which extends the luminance range up until that point through a feather. So the transitioning and blending of the mask just appears smoother. And then of course I will intersect that with just the mosque because I don't want to affect the other parts of the image. I will lower the shadows, giving the shadows a punchier contrast. You can already see how big of an effect that made. And to top it all off, I will add a vignette by creating a radial gradient and then invert the mask and then lower the exposure. For the finishing touches, I will just adjust the colors to be on the warmer side to give that feeling that you're watching a very warm, beautiful sunrise. And with that, I am going to end up with this image. As another example, this second photo was taken from the famous Batu Caves in Malaysia during the same trip, and our starting point is going to be less contrasty than the previous one, but the workflow is going to be very similar as well. So to speed the editing up, I will just use the auto exposure, and it's looking a little bit bright, and I can even see some clipping on the face of the statue. So I will just lower the exposure first to avoid clipping those highlights, and that might be a good starting point. And then I head over to the tone curve, make a very quick S curve, and again at this point it's looking pretty good already, but we can enhance this further by using the masks again. So the first thing that I want to enhance in this image is of course the stairs, because that is going to be a highlight of this area where you have the very colorful stairs. And to do that, I will select a brush and then paint over, and then I can increase the exposure so that the stairs pop out a little bit more. This is going to be a temple situated inside a cave, so I want to have some way to make these caves pop. To do that, I will use a color range and then select the whiter parts of this cave, intersect that with a linear gradient to just select the top part. And then here I can increase the exposure and maybe increase the shadows. So the next thing that I want to adjust are the trees because they are looking a bit too dark. I will use a luminance range on those areas, increase a bit, and then I can increase the exposure so that they won't be too dark. After some finishing touches on colors and profile corrections, we're going to be ending up in this image. So hopefully this video was able to show you how powerful it could be to enhance the light and contrast in your images to make them pop. So see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.